Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome to episode 46 of the Cloudcast. We're coming to you live from our massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. And on today's show, we're not only literally going all over the map with our guest, Ben Kepes, but we're doing our very first show from the future. So Ben's coming to us as our first guest from New Zealand. It is Thursday here in the United States. It is Friday in New Zealand. So we're getting basically crystal ball insight from one of the industry leaders around cloud computing. And we thought today we'd have some fun because for people that follow Ben or people that may not know him as well, you're involved with things all over the map. So welcome to the show, and how are you today?
Thanks, man. It's awesome to be here, and you're not the first person to say that I'm prescient. Living in the future kind of helps. It's going to be fun. I'm looking forward to talking to you guys. Cloud is an insanely interesting space for the 100 or so of people in the world of us who actually watch it, and it's always good to talk. Yeah.
So there's a few things. Obviously, you're involved with a lot of stuff. We're going to get into a lot of things. One of the things that I'd love to sort of dive into, just as far as your background and so forth, for anybody that isn't familiar with you. And Aaron and I have this conversation all the time. When you don't live in Silicon Valley, or maybe you don't live in, say, Austin or Boston, or one of the sort of gravitational centers of the technology world, I'm always very interested from a background, from a how you stay connected perspective, from somebody like yourself who's not only not in the same time zone, but I mean a long way away. So give us some background on yourself. Give us some sense of how you stay so connected in the technology world, in the cloud computing space, not only in your native New Zealand ANZ, but all over the world.
Sure. Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, so there's a couple of things going on. And in terms of how did I get into this space, it was all very sort of serendipitous and fortuitous. I'm a business guy. I own and run kind of a huge number of small businesses, and I've always had to wrangle technology in those businesses. And so from wrangling technology, I started talking about technology, and all of a sudden it kind of rolled into this. In terms of I've been lucky with my timing. I started, commentating about the space, I guess 6 or 8 years ago. And obviously cloud is this massive wave, and I've ridden a wave, and I've built a bit of a brand for myself. And part of that has been through, I spend a lot of time on airplanes. I'm in the US at least every month, and more often sometimes. I use Twitter. I use all the tools. We're talking on Skype now. Google Hangouts. You name it, I use it. And to be honest, I live in New Zealand. I live in paradise. But the reality is essentially that I work in the US. And so, sometimes it's a drag not being at every meetup, not being able to share, every beer that goes on with the Clouderati. But at the end of the day, I kind of managed to keep myself connected, even though I'm not there all the time.
And Ben, you mentioned about you being on airplanes all the time, and yet it seems like you are in the U.S. about every month or almost every week. It seems like sometimes. What are some of the major shows or major highlights or places to really hang out and to really stay connected in the industry?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I mean, I have to say that the Clouderati, this crazy Twitter group that's been going now for 4 or 5 years, started by Sam J. From the outside, it looks like one great big circle jerk, if you excuse the term. A bunch of people, self-congratulating, and a big echo chamber. But beyond that, those folks, without wanting to sound kind of hip and cool, those folks are my peeps, and so it's a bunch of people that work together in the broader sense of the term, and that are buddies. And yeah, we argue and we have disagreements and we redefine the cloud every 25 minutes. But at the end of the day, there's some good folks, and so it's always good to get to events where there's a lot of the Clouderati there. And so, Cloud Connect in March for some reason happens to be quite a draw card. A bunch of people go there. Defrag, always like to give a shout out to Eric Norland, who organises two of by far the best conferences in the world, Defrag and Glue, there in Colorado. Basically, when you spend as much time at events as I do, there's not too much that you hear that is new or revolutionary. So really, for me, what makes an event is having a lot of folks there that I want to hang out with, that I want to spend time with, that I want to catch out with, and I have to say, getting past the Cloud 101 basic conversations. I'm not so arrogant to think that the whole world is where we are at. The fact is that we do need to explain cloud to a lot of people, but it's nice to kind of be in a room with people where you don't have to do that anymore. That's all been done.
Yeah, absolutely. It's you're right. It's a weird phenomenon because everybody who's been doing it, even for a little while, feels like they've been doing it, and then you kind of realize you're the 1%, you're the 3%, you're the 5%, and there are still a lot of people that are just trying to make sense of this stuff. So yeah, that piece of it is a little frustrating, like you said, when you're kind of reinventing the definitions every couple of months. Sometimes the vendors do it because it's a follow the money thing, but sometimes it's we've learned enough stuff, we do need to reinvent some stuff. It does make it sort of challenging. So let's talk a little bit. Like we mentioned in the introduction, you wear a lot of hats. One of them is as an analyst, a commentator, somebody who a lot of groups go to for insight into what's going on in the industry. We're halfway through the year. What are you seeing as the very interesting major trends, the sort of changing strategies? Because 2012 has been a pretty big year in terms of not only announcements, but people throwing their weight behind things, throwing their money behind things, and some very interesting shifts going on.
Sure. Yeah, it's funny. I saw last night there was a cloud camp in the UK, and Shanley gave a presentation there where she was saying, she said a lot of things, but one of the things she seemed to say was that the cloud API wars was something that was completely invented by analysts and marketers, and it's completely self-serving, which is funny because at the end of the day, there's millions and millions of dollars that companies have invested based on these cloud wars. Be it Amazon, Eucalyptus, Rackspace or the OpenStack crowd, CloudStack, and the cloud wars are real. At the end of the day, we're looking at a major shift in the way technology is delivered, and in any major shift, there are new kings made and old kings fall by the wayside, and that is nothing but war. That's the reality. There's a war going on out there, and so that's really interesting for me. And part of that, not so much in terms of the stack wars. Part of the interesting thing for me is what's happening with the incumbents, and I like to watch VMware reasonably closely, and I'm really interested by what's gone on. They're doing a bunch of different things. They're doing the whole application stuff from SlideRocket to SocialCast to Zimbra. They introduced Cloud Foundry, and platform as a service, I believe, is the future of the cloud, and really exciting future, and that's great. But VMware have a bit of a history of being a particular type of organization, and I'm really fascinated to see how all of that shakes down, how Cloud Foundry shakes down, how the acquisition of DynamicOps the other day shakes down. It's really interesting watching those canny and wily traditional vendors, if you can call a vendor that's only been around for sort of 10 years, traditional, see how they react to this brave new world.
And let me ask you this. So the DynamicOps acquisition this week, you wrote a very interesting analysis about it. Would you mind telling everyone a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so it's intensely interesting for me because beyond any of the sort of vagaries of moving here and there, it's an admission by VMware that their future isn't completely homogeneous, that people are going to want to use different stuff depending on the situation, and so that is a pretty staunch admission. What they do with it, whether they keep it very proprietary, as VMware has done, traditionally, or whatever. We don't know. I think a few months ago I was invited to speak to a bunch of investment bankers and VC firms and stuff like that, and to give my take on what I think were the hot spaces, I guess, or the hot investments to make. And as an aside, I was shocked by just how little those people who are investing billions and billions of dollars don't understand the stuff. But anyway,
Sure.
When I was asked what's hot, to me, anything that straddles a bunch of different things. So, for example, in the application space, integration services that straddle a bunch of different applications. At the platform space, management consoles that straddle a bunch of different services. And at the infrastructure space, I've been bullish for a long, long time about Stratus, partly because, George Reese, co-founder and CTO, is an incredibly nice guy and an amazing member of the cloud community. But also because what they're doing absolutely captures the zeitgeist, if you will, of where technology is going. And so any of those plays that really straddle a bunch of different services. And so, dynamic ops is kind of the first we've seen at the infrastructure layer of VMware moving away from vCloud is the way, the truth, and the light, and everything, to we need to provide tools that allow people to manage their workloads across, multiple stacks, multiple hypervisors, and that's really interesting.
And have we reached a point where, like you mentioned, VMware, I don't know, maybe 10 years old or so, is that like 10 years is now the new old company? We don't have companies that are in technology starting to move so fast that, what is an old company anymore, and at what point do the companies get so big? And, all the time you hear these days, VMware is kind of following the Microsoft path in many ways. And, a lot of times, I guess if you look at Maritza, it might make sense.
10 years is probably... whether you call it old or mature or whatever, 10 years is probably realistically the time where you say that company is going to go through a really, really significant business model shift, right? Whether it's Google, who has to, Google's kind of in the same boat as VMware, where it's like you go from one business model, one revenue source, to I've got to try a bunch of different ones, and things like Cloud Foundry, which is open source, or things like SlideRocket and so forth, which are SaaS applications. Totally different business model 10 years in than they were with hypervisors. Sort of similar to Google with ads, and now all of a sudden it's how do I make money in phone operating systems or whatever. And I think you're right. Facebook's going to come up on 10 years here pretty soon, and they're going to go through that. So 10 years is probably the new benchmark. I think you're probably right, Aaron. Whether you call it old or new, maybe call it puberty, right? It's hit puberty or something like that, right?
Well, it's interesting because if you look, I spend a lot of time watching Salesforce because they're a really interesting company, and they're 12 years old now. The reality is, if you were going to today start up a company to be the new Oracle, I guess, or the new SAP, would you build a data center? You probably wouldn't. Would you use some open source technologies on which to build your platform? You probably would. Absolutely, the rate of change, the velocity of what's happening in this industry is increasing, and 10 is the new 20, is the new 30, is the new 40.
So let me ask you this, Ben. So the other kind of major shift or trend that we were, Brian and I have been kind of following this year is the kind of relabeling of public cloud and almost enterprise cloud, if you will, and going up against the idea originally of, okay, if you want to do a lot of these public cloud kind of things, you're rewriting your apps from the ground up to be elastic, to take advantage of this, to do that, and you're seeing a lot of almost kind of backpedaling or remessaging a lot this year around that particular market, because a lot of enterprises are kind of, at least in my experience, kind of looking at it and going, what? No, I'm not going to rewrite those apps. I'm not going to do that for, I don't know, another 5 years, 10 years, something like that. And what are you seeing around the adoption of cloud computing based specifically around that trend?
Yeah, it's interesting, and I always use Christian Riley as the real bellwether here, because not only is he someone who innately understands the cloud, but he does so from a perspective working inside one of the largest, enterprises, the largest engineering construction company in the world. And so, at the end of the day, who am I sitting here on my throne to say what's going on inside enterprise? That the reality is what Christian sees, and he's talked a number of times about the fact that there are all these legacy applications, all these existing workloads that will continue to run on their mainframes, on their AS400s, on their whatever, that are never going to move to the cloud. And why should they? They're working. No one wants to touch them because they're going to break. They form critical parts of the business. But what do people want to do? Well, people simply want to have access to their data, and so no problem with the application sitting there doing what it does. But all we want to do is expose some of that data to mobile devices, to different form factors, to whatever. And so I really think that when I talk about cloud and when I talk about the changes in enterprise, I talk much more broadly than any one technology. I talk, generational shifts, the demand for tools that are like those that we're using at home. I talk, mobile access, mobile data. I talk collaboration, agility. All these things together are the broader landscape of what I'm seeing. And yet, cloud, and cloud very broadly, because, API enablement isn't cloud per se, but that's kind of part of the package. Cloud, with a capital C, I guess, is an enabler for a lot of these different things, and so it's tying together a bunch of different threads.
Okay, so we could probably go on and on about what's going on, trends and so forth, and but let's sort of shift gears a little bit, but kind of in that same vein. So one of the other hats that you wear is as an investor, which means that you're working with a number of companies. You can go out to your website. You've got disclosure about who all you work with. But some of them are cloud computing centric companies. They're technology companies. I think one of them is Cloudability. So Matt Ellis and the guys out in Seattle who are doing some of the very cool stuff around costing around cloud and so forth. As you're acting as an investor, but you're also thinking from the perspective of thinking about what do customers want, what do businesses want, or it could be your businesses. How much do you think, or how far along do you think we are in terms of people saying, I love these new services. They're simpler to consume. They're simpler to kind of understand visually. They're easier. But there's this concern about, will they still be in business? Will they be around in 2 years? What will happen to my data? How much does that play a role in what you're investing in, or as you're talking to people? How much do you hear that discussed?
Yeah, there's a lot of that. From an investment perspective, it's more about this market is so frothy, and there's so much roll up going to happen with larger vendors acquiring discrete parts of technology. And so, for me, it's more about, if I look at, and Cloudability, actually they're Portland, not Seattle, by the way.
Okay. Yep. That's right. You're right. Yep. I should know that.
If I look at those guys, I look at what they're doing, and yes, absolutely, there's a problem space there with people not having visibility over their cloud spend. But, looking at what Cloudability does, they are absolutely fantastic executors. Matt Ellis is around and about, wrangling deals, partnering, doing funding rounds, doing all this stuff, and that's what it takes. And so, when I talk to companies, and I do a lot of a bunch of advisory work outside. I only do a tiny wee bit of investing, but I do a lot of advisory work with a lot of companies, and I talk to companies and say that really the technology or the solution is unfortunately maybe a very small part of what you're doing, and sort of 80% of it is being seen, presence, being seen as a thought leader, partnering. And so I'm helping out a company down here in New Zealand that's actually got a beta product that's launching next week, which is all very exciting, which is kind of cloud marketplace management portal for platform as a service built on top of Cloud Foundry. And those guys, I was attracted to them because two super smart guys, totally understand the space. Clearly they need help, building some profile or whatever. But when it comes to having a level of conversation that is up there with the best in the world, when you can see two people that are doing it despite having never actually sat down face to face with anyone in the broader Cloud Foundry ecosystem, when you can achieve that from little old New Zealand, then give it some money and give it some exposure to the right people face to face, and that can do amazing things. So that's pretty exciting.
Yeah.
And you bring up an interesting point in the fact that, do you even need to be in Silicon Valley anymore? You got Cloudability up there in Portland. You got guys in New Zealand. I mean, for the longest time, it's always, you need to be in Silicon Valley, but do you?
Yeah, I mean, you may not need to live in Silicon Valley, but you need to spend a heck of a lot of time in Silicon Valley. And so Matt from Cloudability, sure, they live in Portland, but last year or earlier this year, no, maybe late last year, they were doing Techstars Cloud in San Antonio, and so based there essentially. Matt is in Silicon Valley pretty much every week, as is JR and a bunch of the other people. I'm there at least once a month, and more often. Quite often more than once a month. And so the reality is no, you do not need to live in Silicon Valley, but you need to have a mind shift to where you essentially think in Silicon Valley. And so I run a West Coast time zone. I always talk about the fact that I'm in New Zealand, but I kind of make a joke about it because I live on a farm and I've got sheep walking around the place. But in terms of where my mind's at and where I consider myself, I'm essentially a Silicon Valley worker.
Yeah, no, I would, having worked for both East Coast and West Coast companies, I'd kind of agree. I think it's like you said, whether you physically live there or not, you kind of have to adapt to their time zone. So you have to sort of be available when they're available, so you appear to be there. I think to a certain extent, you have to be keeping. I don't know if you have to keep track of so much the mainline stuff that's going on out there, but you do have to pay attention to the kind of the underbelly of what's going on, because that there's that inherent paranoia, and there's that inherent I may have screwed up the last company, but I'm doing the next company stuff that you always kind of have to have your fingers on. And but yeah, I mean, Aaron, you're kind of right. I mean, the proximity of where you are anymore kind of isn't as big a deal, right? I mean, Amazon's out of Seattle, and they won't let you typically work anywhere from Seattle, and Stratus is up in Minnesota, for God's sake. I mean, Rackspace is down in San Antonio, and so yeah, it is sort of different, I think. What's going on there.
It is, but the interesting thing is, so in Stratus, perfect example, in Minnesota, wherever that is. But James is in Silicon Valley, and I've only ever seen George in Silicon Valley or in New Zealand. Actually, I have to say, seeing they've got a lot of development going on down here. So again, same kind of deal.
Yep. Well, in a quick George Reese story, Brian and I don't know if that was the first time you ever met him, Brian, but I met him at VMworld last year. They had a little vExpert party and all that, but based off of his Twitter conversations lately, I'm pretty sure he won't be making it this year.
I was going to say, when you said George Reese at VMworld, there's an unholy relationship going on.
Yeah. So let me shift gears sort of once again. I want to come back to something that you're involved with, like really heavily involved with, which I think is pretty cool. So we talked about kind of this sort of changing trends in the industry. We've talked about how businesses and small companies are sort of having to change to adapt to stuff. And then in the middle of that is the people that are involved with it, whether they're writing software, 'cause it's an open source type of involvement, or it's people that are trying to learn. You're kind of involved with that as well. So talk a little bit about first what you do with CloudU with Rackspace, which I think is pretty cool. I've been through the program, or at least done the online piece. And then contrast that from a learning communities perspective, which is kind of somewhat infrastructure centric, cloud centric, to like some of the work that you do around something like the Defrag or GlueCon, which is very software development, developer centric.
Sure. So, I mean, given my background, I'm not an engineer. I'm not a technologist per se. I'm a business guy. I still own I don't know how many businesses completely unrelated to tech. A manufacturing business, some commercial property businesses, a bunch of different things. And so, at the end of the day, my bottom line is technology is there to solve the problems that people have. I remember first dealing with technology, 20 years ago when I was doing spreadsheets on an Apple something or other, I don't know what it was, an early Apple, and I saw that technology could fundamentally help a business. And so with that perspective, then it's really frustrating to now spend time inside the technology industry where, despite being a bunch of great friends, the Clouderati spend huge amounts of time arguing definitions and wrangling acronyms, which doesn't actually help mom and pop business to understand, hey, how can Google Apps help my business? And it really is as simple as that. I have email right now. I have to run a mail server. How can you take me out of that hell because I don't want to run a mail server? And so, long story short, I saw that and it was really, really painful. And what I wanted to do was run a really sort of broad brush, very, very 101 education program about cloud. Luckily, I was talking to a bunch of Rackspace people, and I said, this is what I want to do, and they bought into that vision and came on board and sponsored it. And I think it's a really interesting case study because there was always a concern when I announced what I was doing that, Ben's going to go work for Rackspace and it's all terrible. I don't work for Rackspace. They sponsor the Cloud U program, but have allowed it to be really, really vendor neutral. And so if you look at the course content and the examinations and the coursework, obviously there's a Rackspace logo on it, but Rackspace isn't mentioned throughout the text. It really is completely vendor neutral. And my perspective on that is that we're in the absolutely tiny early days of this industry. We're completely Paleolithic, and so there's no point arguing and fighting over market share because we're hitting 1% of the addressable market. We're all better as an industry, as vendors, as analysts, as commentators, as whoever. We're all much better to simply grow the knowledge, to grow the number of people that understand and use cloud, and in 5 years' time, when we've reached 60% market saturation, then we can argue over market share. But until that time, we're doing everyone a disservice by getting into battles. And so cloud use, it's very 101. A lot of people have been, when the course content started to come out, people were critical, saying, this is basic though. And it's like, well, that's my point. The whole point is that I use my friends and colleagues in the area that I live as kind of a great testing bed because, as I said, I live on a small farm. I live in a rural area. If I was to go down to my local community and say, what is cloud computing, they would obviously talk about the weather because clouds are pretty big in farming areas, and not have a clue. And so that is my ideal person. That's the sort of person that I want to give a 101 progression to understanding, at least to be able to be in a position where they can ask sensible questions.
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. Over here we have this joke, explain it to me like a 5-year-old or explain it to me like a 5th grader. You must walk around going, explain it to me like a sheep farmer.
Pretty much. Yeah.
Well, and think about this too. Not only there's two sides of it. Obviously, there's the simplify it for people that maybe don't necessarily know a lot about it. But I also look at it this way too. Just like you were saying, sometimes it's the whole technology for the sake of technology as opposed to solving a business issue. And too many people that are in our industry get too caught up into technological advantages and this and that. But at the end of the day, we're solving business problems. And when we as technologists, when that light bulb goes off, and you start presenting things in business drivers or business needs, that tends to be a major leap forward in a lot of careers as well, when it's not just chasing the latest shiny technology.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's absolutely right. Yep.
Yep. Now contrast that to the more developer communities, and you're acting like you mentioned, you're less as a technologist and more as a helping facilitate getting things around. One of the things that I'm trying to figure out, and we keep coming back to, we're very much in the early days, but Adrian over at Netflix has started joking around that you can't have a cloud conference these days unless you mention him in every single one of the sessions or every single one of the presentations. Are we still really? I mean, that when comments like that come out, and they're kind of tongue in cheek, but they're also there's some reality to it that says, like, wow, we are really, really at an early stage, because it is still just a few folks at the Clouderati and an Adrian from Netflix, or it's this thing that Aaron and I have talked about. The examples are always Netflix, Zynga, so and so and so and so. Like, how do we help the communities move past that? I mean, what do you see as, like, in the defrag, the glue community? I mean, what do you see in that encourages you that says it's going to start expanding more quickly?
Yeah, it's interesting, and I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I was watching Gig Room Structure from afar last week when Adrian, it was really interesting because Adrian was in the audience apparently, and yet his name was used by two sides in the Cloud API war, which was kind of hilarious. And the great thing about Adrian is he's a lovely, lovely guy and really humble, and so other people in that position could use that power and use that credibility for bad purposes. But luckily with Adrian, he doesn't, and he's a fantastic guy. I think. Actually, what was the question? I got off on a tangent there.
Yeah, no, no. My question was kind of, it's fantastic that there's folks like Adrian who are willing to kind of give back and be so vocal about what they do, because what they do is different. But are you starting to see any signs that we're moving past everybody referencing Netflix? I mean, are we, Christian Riley's a great example, because he's talking about it from the perspective of a large enterprise that basically, builds physical brick and mortar bridges and airports and stuff. And so it's not this, it's always these digital only companies. But are you starting to see more examples of just different types of companies that are coming out and saying, we're adopting these new cloud principles, we're doing new things? I mean, do you see that in any of the other communities, more developer-centric communities yet?
Yeah, yes and no. I mean, the fact of the matter is that, every mainstream event still wants Adrian, still wants Zynga, still wants, as you say, the usual suspects. I think the difficulty we have is that, so the other day, a couple of weeks ago, I was in New York, and when I was there, I met a company doing crazy real-time financial services industry analytic calculation stuff, rocket science stuff. And they have just, they've been going for about 10 years doing, providing financial service companies with software, and they've just done a partnership with actually another New Zealand company called Green Button to do all the stuff in the cloud. And basically it's a kind of it's a cloudy take on high performance computing, if you will.
Okay.
And the interesting thing there is that, heavily regulated industry, an industry that one would think would be very against using the cloud, and yet it's happening. And so I think there are definitely great case studies occurring, but more often than not, the users don't want the world to know about it. And so I got to talk to the software company that's doing the stuff, but I didn't get to talk to any customers, or if I did get to talk to customers, I didn't get to actually, name names.
Yep.
And so a lot of stuff's happening, but a lot of stuff for commercial reasons is behind, behind the wall. And with Netflix, at the end of the day, it makes for a great story, and it just gets them some more attention. And because they are so dominant, they've got nothing to lose by telling the story. And so, the reality is that is the way it's going to be for the foreseeable future. I am excited. I'm also involved, along with a colleague, Paul Miller, in the UK, helping out with VentSpeak's CloudBeat event, which is in November down in Redwood City. And so we're focused there on absolutely telling sort of case study stories. And so it is really exciting to hear when we're seeking submissions for case studies, to hear these really, really neat case studies that aren't a Netflix and aren't a Zynga, that potentially are quite a small company, but leveraging cloud to do some incredible things. And last year we had a great story where it seems like I'm pulling out all the New Zealand examples, but a New Zealand bespoke development shop built this pretty amazing business intelligence tool where they were trawling. They'd built this tool for a company in Australia, and they were trawling literally hundreds and hundreds of data sources, of media sources. And if you think of it as a modern equivalent of a clipping service, where in the old days you paid someone to clip newspapers and magazines, they were trawling hundreds and hundreds of media feeds and giving high level corporate insights into sentiment, into where companies were being mentioned, and that was all built. In that case, it was built on top of Heroku, and they could use the cloud to kind of forget about servers, which is kind of what we've been talking about for years. So those kind of case studies, they're not nearly as high profile because everyone in the world knows what Netflix is, and so it's an easy sell. But kind of more exciting to see, half a dozen developers down in New Zealand leverage the cloud to build something that they simply wouldn't have been able to do before.
Yeah, that part's very, very cool. And those are always the stories that are really kind of the most interesting. The ones that don't focus on, well, we did this or that and we saved 10%. It's the ones that, like you said, do something you never could do before, changed a market that you never would have necessarily, kind of got around a big barrier or an incumbent. So that'll be interesting. So send us the details. We'll make sure that we'll kind of get it into our show notes so folks can know about the event that you're having down in Redwood City. Well, listen, Ben and Aaron, I think we're sort of hitting that sweet spot where folks start tuning us out. But I want to thank you so much for being on today. You were, along with Chris Hoff, you were kind of our white whale, the one we've been wanting to get on the show for a long, long time. We always had scheduling challenges, so I really appreciate you making the time for us today. One last thing, and then Aaron, I'll let you take us out, and we can kind of find out where Ben's going to be. I want to thank all of our listeners. We're not sure what we've done differently over the last couple of months, but our listenership has gone way, way up. So we want to thank everybody that listens. If you like the show, tell a friend, tell a grandmother, see if she understands what we're talking about, kind of go through that same litmus test. But as part of doing that, we've had a number of very smart people who've approached us and said, hey, can we get involved with the show? We like what you guys do in terms of giving back knowledge. So we've got some things that we're not totally ready to announce yet, but we've got a couple of new things that we're going to expand upon in terms of both geography and the types of topics we talk about. So you'll start seeing those over the next couple of months. And the other thing that Aaron's been beating the crap out of me about, and we're going to finally do something about it, is we realize both the audio quality and the video quality of a lot of the stuff we produce is kind of amateur. So we're going to get our act together and clean up both the audio and the video quality of a lot of the stuff we do, and hopefully folks like that a little better. So Aaron, I know you're looking forward to some of that.
Yeah, so we just didn't think anyone would notice, and then people actually complained. So we're like, oh no, people are watching it. We got to clean it up.
Yeah. So very cool. Well, Aaron, listen, I think we're running short of time. You want to take us home?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're out of time for this week. So Ben, where can everyone follow you and find out more about what you're doing in the world?
Sure. So probably the best thing is Twitter. My name's Ben Kepes, so BenKepes. Follow me on Twitter. I'm always stoked to talk to my peeps, and I'll see some of you in the US. If you ever see me at an event, I'm pretty distinctive. Come and say howdy, because I always like to talk to people.
Awesome. Very cool. So you can follow us on Twitter at thecloudcast.net, or you can reach us on the web at thecloudcast.net. And you can also, so the complete aside here, something that's really, really cool. So I usually get everything through iTunes, but if you do the new iCloud or Music Match, it turns out they don't do anything with podcasts. I found this out the hard way recently. But Apple just released a new podcasting app that you can get on the phone. So if you're using Music Match and you're not, you just want to download everything straight to your phone, you can use that. Another very, very cool app that's out there that I use a lot is Instacast, which allows you to both stream and download podcasts straight to the phone. So quick complete public service announcement on the side there. Some very cool apps that just came out in the last couple weeks that are definitely worth checking out. So with that said, we want to thank everyone for listening. And Ben, again, thank you very, very much for your time. And we'll talk to everyone soon. Thank you very much.